The moment my husband looked me straight in the eyes, smiled without the slightest trace of fear, and whispered, "Nobody will ever believe you," I realized the man I had loved for 40 years had been quietly building a prison around me. The forged signatures trembling in my hands were proof enough for me, but not for the rest of the world. Before I could speak another word, the doorbell rang. Once. Then just 2 seconds later, it rang again. I watched every ounce of color drain from Daniel Williams's face, and in that instant I knew someone outside our front door had just changed both of our lives forever. If this opening made you wonder what you would have done in my place, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have confronted your spouse or stayed silent until you had more proof? Share your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and hard-earned justice, please like and subscribe. Your support truly means more than you know. If you had met my husband before everything fell apart, you would have thought I had won the lottery in life. For 40 years, that's exactly what I believed too. My name is Ava Williams. I'm 63 years old, a retired elementary school librarian, and until recently, I would have described my life with one simple word: blessed. Daniel Williams and I met during my sophomore year at Ohio State University. I was studying education. He was finishing a degree in finance. He wasn't the loudest man in the room or the most handsome by magazine standards, but he possessed something that drew people toward him effortlessly. He listened. When you spoke, he looked directly at you, nodded thoughtfully, and somehow made you feel like your words mattered. My parents adored him from the first dinner they shared together. My younger brother used to joke that Daniel could probably convince a stranger to hand over the keys to their house simply by smiling. Back then, I laughed. Years later, that joke would haunt me. We married young, bought a modest brick house in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, and spent decades building what everyone called the perfect life. Daniel became a successful financial advisor. I spent 34 wonderful years helping children discover the joy of reading. Every Christmas, our front porch overflowed with homemade cookies from neighbors. Every 4th of July, Daniel organized the community barbecue. Every Thanksgiving, people insisted our house was where everyone wanted to be. He remembered birthdays. He visited elderly neighbors after surgeries. He donated anonymously to families struggling to pay medical bills. When someone lost a spouse, Daniel was usually the first person knocking on their door with a casserole and an offer to help organize paperwork. People trusted him completely. Sometimes when we attended church together, I would notice how people greeted him before they greeted me. "Morning, Daniel. Always good to see you. We're lucky to have someone like you in this community." I felt proud every single time. Not jealous, proud, because I believed every compliment. At home, he wasn't overly affectionate, but he was dependable. He paid bills on time. He mowed the lawn every Saturday. He remembered to service both cars. He always insisted I shouldn't have to worry about stressful financial matters. "I've got it covered," he would say with a reassuring smile, and I let him. Why wouldn't I? After all, financial planning had been his career for over 40 years. Education had been mine. We each had our roles. That arrangement never seemed unusual. When our daughter Emily Brooks was born, Daniel became the kind of father everyone admired. He attended school concerts. He coached softball for 2 seasons despite barely understanding the rules. He taught Emily how to balance a checkbook before she graduated high school. Even after she married Michael Brooks and became a pediatric nurse, she still called her father whenever she had questions about taxes, insurance, or retirement savings. "Your dad always knows what to do," she'd tell me. I agreed. He usually did. When retirement finally arrived, I imagined life would become simpler. Long walks, weekend road trips, gardening, maybe volunteering at the local literacy center a few days each week. For the first several months, everything felt exactly as I had imagined. Then tiny things began changing, so gradually that I barely noticed. One afternoon at the grocery store, the cashier asked whether I still collected reward points. Before I could answer, Daniel smiled. "She forgets that card every time." He laughed, pulling it from his wallet. The cashier chuckled politely. I laughed too, but the truth was, I hadn't forgotten. Daniel had simply answered first. It seemed harmless. Another time during dinner with Emily and Michael, I began telling a funny story about one of my former students. Halfway through the story, Daniel interrupted. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "That wasn't Ethan, it was Jacob." Everyone laughed. "So many years in the classroom," Emily teased. "I guess the names all blend together," I smiled. Maybe they did, except later that night I found the old class photo while cleaning my office. The boy's name had been Ethan, not Jacob. I almost mentioned it to Daniel. Then I stopped myself. It wasn't important, or so I thought. The interruptions became more frequent. At restaurants, waiters would ask what I wanted to drink. Daniel answered before I opened my mouth. At medical appointments, doctors asked how I had been sleeping. Daniel responded first. When neighbors asked whether I planned to attend community events, Daniel would smile and say, "She's been forgetting dates lately. I'll make sure she gets there." Every sentence sounded caring, protective, loving. No one questioned it, least of all me. One Saturday morning, I searched for my reading glasses. I checked the kitchen, the bedroom, the laundry room. After 15 frustrating minutes, Daniel walked into the living room holding them. "They were on your nightstand," he said. "I looked there." "You must have missed them." I accepted the explanation. A week later, it happened again, this time with my car keys, then my favorite gardening gloves, then a notebook I used almost every day. Each time, Daniel eventually found them. Each time he smiled kindly. "You've been absent-minded lately." It sounded like concern, never criticism. That's what made it so effective. One afternoon, my longtime friend Linda invited me to volunteer at the literacy center, where we'd spent years reading with struggling children. Before I answered, Daniel spoke. "I don't think that's a good idea." Linda looked confused. "Why not?" Daniel placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Ava gets tired more easily now." I frowned. "I do," he smiled warmly. "You just don't notice it yourself." Linda nodded sympathetically. "I understand. She never invited me again. I told myself Daniel was only looking out for me. Still, something deep inside me felt uncomfortable. Not frightened, just smaller, like pieces of my independence were disappearing one at a time. Emily visited every Sunday afternoon. More and more often, Daniel would mention little stories before she arrived. "Your mother forgot where she parked yesterday." She couldn't remember the neighbor's last name. "She almost paid the electric bill twice." Emily would glance at me with gentle concern. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," she smiled. "If Dad says you're forgetting little things, maybe it's just normal aging." Normal aging. I repeated those words to myself countless times. After all, I was in my 60s. Maybe everyone forgot things occasionally. Maybe I was becoming overly sensitive. Everything looked painfully ordinary, except Daniel wasn't there. I reached into my coat pocket and closed my fingers around the brass key. The engraved initials caught the light once again. RH214. Just then I heard footsteps on the staircase. Ethan walked into the living room carrying a thick folder. He hesitated before speaking. "Mom," he said carefully, "I think we should start discussing the house before things become more complicated." I told myself it was simply a way to stay organized, nothing more. I had no idea that simple habit would one day become the strongest evidence that my mind had never betrayed me. It wasn't my memory that was changing. It was my husband, and I still hadn't begun to understand just how carefully Daniel Williams had been rewriting my life while convincing everyone, including me, that I was the one losing my grip on reality. The journal quickly became part of my nightly routine. Every evening after Daniel went upstairs to watch the late news, I would sit alone in the den with a cup of chamomile tea and write down everything I could remember about the day. At first my entries were ordinary. Monday, picked up groceries, called Emily, watered the roses, finished the mystery novel Linda recommended. Nothing remarkable, nothing dramatic, just the kind of details retired people often record to make the days feel less alike. I never imagined those pages would eventually become the only voice I trusted. Within a few weeks, I noticed something strange. Daniel's version of certain events rarely matched mine. One Tuesday afternoon, I clearly remembered paying the gas bill online after breakfast. I even wrote the confirmation number in my journal before closing my laptop. 3 days later, Daniel frowned while sorting through the mail. "You forgot to pay the gas company again." I didn't. He looked at me sympathetically. "Sweetheart, the overdue notice is right here." He held up the envelope. For a brief second, I questioned myself. Had I imagined paying it? Then I remembered the journal. Excusing myself, I walked into the den, opened the notebook, and found the confirmation number exactly where I remembered writing it. I returned with the journal in my hands. I paid it Tuesday morning. Daniel barely glanced at the page. "You probably started the payment and forgot to finish it." His answer came so quickly that I didn't have time to argue. Later that evening, I checked our online bank account. The payment had never gone through. I stared at the screen for several minutes. I knew I had completed it. I remembered clicking the final confirmation button, yet somehow there was no record. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. For the first time, I wondered if I truly was forgetting things. That possibility terrified me, My mother had suffered from dementia during the last 5 years of her life. I still remember the day she looked at me and called me by her younger sister's name. The heartbreak in her eyes haunted me long after she was gone. Was that future waiting for me too? I didn't tell anyone about my fear. Not Emily, not Michael, certainly not Daniel. Instead, I became even more careful. I started saving receipts, taking photographs, writing exact times beside every important task. If I mailed a birthday card, I noted the time. If I watered the garden, I wrote it down. If I took medication, I recorded the dosage. It felt excessive, almost ridiculous, but the habit gave me comfort. Unfortunately, Daniel noticed. One evening, he found me writing before bed. "What are you working on?" "My journal," he smiled. "Still making lists." "It helps me stay organized," he laughed softly. "You've always been adorable." There was nothing cruel in his voice, nothing anyone else would have questioned. But something about the way he watched me close the notebook made me instinctively slide it into my nightstand instead of leaving it on the dresser. The next morning it wasn't there. I searched the bedroom twice, then the bathroom, then every drawer in the house. Daniel found me nearly in tears. "What happened?" "My journal." "What journal?" "The brown notebook." "Oh." He walked into the kitchen. Less than 30 seconds later he returned holding it. "It was sitting on the counter." "No, it wasn't." He tilted his head gently. "Ava." That single word carried so much quiet disappointment that I immediately felt guilty. Maybe I had left it there. Maybe I was becoming careless. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He kissed my forehead. "Nothing to apologize for." But after he left the room, I opened the journal. The bookmark I always kept between the pages had been moved. Someone had read it. I couldn't prove it. Still, I knew. That evening I drove to a stationery store across town. I bought another notebook exactly the same size and color. From then on I kept 2 journals. One remained in the nightstand. The second stayed hidden inside a storage box beneath old photo albums in the attic. The first contained harmless daily routines. The second contained everything. Every conversation, every interruption, every time Daniel corrected me in public, every missing object, every uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. Writing those pages became my private promise to myself. If I ever truly began losing my memory, I wanted proof of when it started. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel slowly became even more involved in every part of my life. He insisted on driving whenever we went somewhere together. "You've always hated traffic." I had never hated traffic. He started scheduling my medical appointments himself. "I'll remember everything the doctor says." He insisted on organizing my medications into weekly containers. "It'll make things easier." One afternoon, my longtime friend Linda called. "I haven't seen you in forever." "I know. We're having lunch Friday." "I'd love to come." Before I finished speaking, Daniel walked into the kitchen. "Tell Linda Friday won't work." I covered the phone. "Why?" "You already have an appointment." "I do." He nodded confidently. "I scheduled one with Dr. Harris." Embarrassed, I apologized to Linda and canceled. Later that evening, I checked the family calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Friday was completely empty. I waited until after dinner. "Daniel, what time is my appointment Friday?" He looked at me for several seconds, then smiled. "Oh, they moved it to next week." So, I canceled lunch for nothing. I forgot they rescheduled. Forgot. The word lingered in the air. He had forgotten, yet somehow I still ended up apologizing. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He squeezed my hand. "It happens." That night I wrote 6 full pages in my hidden journal. For the first time I didn't simply record events. I asked myself a question. Why do I keep apologizing for things that aren't my fault? I stared at those words for a long time. The answer never came. A few days later, Emily visited after work. She hugged me tightly before helping prepare dinner. While chopping vegetables, she smiled gently. "Dad says you've been having a few forgetful moments." I stopped cutting carrots. "What do you think?" She hesitated. "I think getting older is hard." I didn't ask about aging. She looked uncomfortable. "I just don't want you to worry." Before I could answer, Daniel entered carrying a pitcher of iced tea. "What are my favorite girls talking about?" Emily smiled. "Nothing serious." Daniel winked at me. "Your mother was just telling me yesterday that she couldn't remember where she put her reading glasses." I looked up sharply. "I never said that," he chuckled. "See?" Emily gave me a sympathetic smile. "It's okay, Mom." That smile hurt more than any argument could have. It wasn't pity from a stranger. It was pity from my own daughter. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I climbed into the attic and opened the hidden journal. My hands trembled as I wrote one final sentence before closing the cover. I don't think Daniel is simply helping me anymore. I stared at those words until tears blurred the ink, because for the first time in 40 years of marriage, another possibility entered my mind. What if my husband wasn't protecting me? What if he was making sure the whole world believed I needed protection? For the next several days, I couldn't shake the question that had found its way into my journal. What if Daniel wasn't protecting me? I hated myself for even thinking it. This was the man who had stood beside me when my father died, the man who held my hand through 2 miscarriages before Emily was born, the man who drove across Ohio in the middle of the night to pick me up when my car broke down during a snowstorm 30 years earlier. Those memories were real. I had lived them. So how could that same man be capable of manipulating me now? I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe retirement had changed him. Maybe stress was affecting both of us. Maybe we had simply fallen into unhealthy habits without realizing it. I desperately wanted one of those explanations to be true. But then another small incident happened. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I opened our mailbox and found a property tax statement addressed to both of us. Before I could read it, Daniel appeared behind me. I'll take care of that. He reached for the envelope. Without thinking, I held on to it. I'd like to read it first. His smile remained in place, but something in his eyes hardened. It's just another tax notice. I know, so let me handle it. I can read it. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. It lasted no more than 3 seconds. Then he laughed. Of course you can. He released the envelope so casually that I almost believed I had imagined the tension. Almost. That afternoon, I noticed the envelope had disappeared from the kitchen table. I searched every room. It was gone. When I asked Daniel where he had put it, he answered without looking up from his newspaper. I already filed it. You filed it? It wasn't important. I wanted to ask why he hadn't left it for me. Instead, I nodded. That had become my habit. Nod, smile, move on. But inside, something had begun changing. Instead of trusting Daniel automatically, I started paying attention, really paying attention. I noticed he always locked the door to his home office before leaving the house. Not occasionally, every single time. He had never done that during our first 30 years of marriage. The office contained financial books, an old desktop computer, family tax returns, and several filing cabinets. Nothing that should have been secret from me. Whenever I walked past the room, I could hear the faint hum of a paper shredder or the clicking of keyboard keys. If I entered unexpectedly, Daniel always minimized whatever was on his computer screen. Again, each action by itself seemed harmless. Together, they formed a pattern. One Friday morning, Daniel announced he was meeting old coworkers for golf. I'll probably be gone until dinner. Have fun. After he left, I stood in the kitchen staring toward the hallway, the office door. Locked. I almost laughed at myself. What was I thinking? Breaking into my own husband's office? The idea felt absurd, disrespectful. I made coffee instead. Then I watered the flowers, folded laundry, read half a chapter of a novel, yet my eyes kept drifting toward that hallway. Finally, sometime after noon, I walked into the office anyway. The door, as expected, was locked. I turned away. Then something caught my attention. A small brass key lay on top of the hallway bookshelf. I dusted that shelf dozens of times. I had never seen the key before. Curious, I picked it up. It didn't fit the office door. Feeling foolish, I slipped it into my pocket. As I returned to the kitchen, another thought crossed my mind. Daniel almost never left anything important where it could easily be found. Why would he leave a random key sitting in plain sight unless it wasn't random? I walked back to the office. Inside the room, through the narrow gap beneath the door, I noticed sunlight reflecting against the metal legs of Daniel's desk. Then I remembered something. Several months earlier, Daniel had complained that the bottom drawer occasionally stuck. The desk, not the office. Maybe the key belonged there. I unlocked the office using the emergency spare key we had always kept in the garage. A key Daniel must have forgotten still existed. The room smelled faintly of leather printer ink and cedar polish. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. His desk, bookshelves, computer, family photographs, awards from his years as a financial advisor. For a moment, I almost walked back out. Then I opened the bottom drawer. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside was another much smaller key taped beneath a stack of envelopes. My heartbeat quickened. That key fit the tall filing cabinet standing against the back wall. The lock clicked. Slowly, I opened the cabinet. The first drawer contained exactly what I expected. Insurance policies, old tax returns, investment brochures, nothing unusual. The second drawer held neatly organized folders labeled with dates. Again, nothing suspicious. I almost laughed at myself. Then I noticed something odd. The cabinet had a false back panel, only visible because one corner wasn't completely flush. Carefully, I pressed against it. The panel shifted. Behind it sat a narrow black document case. My hands suddenly felt cold. I lifted it out and placed it on the desk. Inside were several thick folders. The first contained property records, our house, a vacation cabin we'd sold years ago, another parcel of land I barely remembered purchasing decades earlier. The next folder contained trust documents. Several pages carried my signature. Except, it wasn't my signature. At first glance, it looked convincing. The same flowing letters, the same looping capital A. But I had signed my name tens of thousands of times during my career. I knew every movement of my own handwriting. These signatures hesitated where mine never hesitated. The pen pressure changed midway through each letter. Someone had copied my signature, carefully, repeatedly. I turned another page, another signature, then another. Power of attorney forms, property transfers, financial authorizations, each bearing my name. Each claiming I had willingly approved major decisions involving nearly everything Daniel and I owned. I never signed these, I whispered. The room suddenly felt too quiet. I pulled out my phone. Hands trembling, I began photographing every single page. One photograph, then another, and another. I didn't know exactly what I was looking at, but I knew enough to understand that these documents could change everything. Halfway through photographing the final folder, my phone buzzed. A text message from Daniel. Golf ended early. Be home in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shoved the folders back into the document case exactly as I'd found them, replaced the false panel, locked the cabinet, returned the small key beneath the envelopes, locked the desk drawer, closed the office. Then I stood in the hallway trying to slow my breathing. I had just reached the kitchen sink when I heard the garage door opening. Daniel stepped inside carrying his golf bag over one shoulder. He smiled exactly the way he always did. Hi, sweetheart. I forced myself to smile back. You're home early. The weather turned. He kissed my cheek. Then almost casually he asked, You haven't been in my office today. Have you? For one terrifying second I forgot how to breathe. For one terrifying second I forgot how to breathe. Daniel stood only a few feet away, rainwater dripping from the brim of his golf cap onto the hardwood floor. His expression was relaxed, almost amused, but his eyes never left my face. You haven't been in my office today, have you? He repeated. Every instinct screamed at me to tell the truth. Instead, I heard myself say no. The lie felt foreign in my mouth. Daniel studied me for another moment before smiling. I must have left the light on. He walked down the hallway. I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly my fingers hurt. If I had left anything out of place, if he noticed the document case had been moved even an inch, if one photograph had failed to save, everything would be over. I heard the office door open. Silence. Then the scrape of a desk drawer, a filing cabinet, another long pause. Every second felt like a minute. Finally, the office door closed. Daniel returned carrying nothing but his reading glasses. I did leave the light on. Oh, you look pale. I'm just tired. He kissed my forehead. Why don't I make dinner tonight? The kindness in his voice almost made me question everything I'd seen. Almost. During dinner, Daniel talked about golf, the weather, and a neighbor's new boat. I answered when necessary, but my mind never left the photographs stored on my phone, the forged signatures, the trust documents, the property transfers. After 40 years of marriage, I suddenly realized I had no idea how much of our financial life I actually understood. That night after Daniel fell asleep, I slipped quietly out of bed and carried my phone into the guest bathroom. I locked the door. With trembling fingers, I opened the photographs one by one. The first document was titled Williams Family Asset Trust. I frowned. We had never discussed creating a family trust. The second page listed properties. Our home, investment accounts, certificates of deposit, retirement funds, nearly everything we owned. My stomach tightened. Then I reached the signature page. My name appeared beside Daniel's, except it wasn't mine. I zoomed in until the image became slightly blurry. The forgery was obvious once I knew what to look for. Whoever signed it had practiced my handwriting. They had copied the shape, not the rhythm. The next document transferred ownership of our house into the trust. Another authorized Daniel to manage every financial decision independently. Another gave him authority to move assets without requiring additional approval. Each document carried my forged signature. Each had been notarized. I stared at the date, 3 years earlier. 3 years. How many other papers had I never seen? I emailed every photograph to a brand new email account Daniel didn't know existed. Then I uploaded copies to secure cloud storage. Only after verifying they had saved successfully did I delete the recent activity from my phone. I didn't trust technology nearly as much as Daniel did, but I trusted having backups. The following morning I couldn't stop looking at him across the breakfast table. He seemed perfectly calm. He read the newspaper, complained about rising grocery prices, asked if I wanted pancakes. How could someone capable of forging his wife's signature discuss maple syrup as though nothing had happened? I finally asked the question that had kept me awake all night. Daniel, do you remember when we created the family trust? His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips, only for a fraction of a second. Then he smiled. Of course. I don't. You were under a lot of stress back then. What stress? My knee surgery. I never had knee surgery. His smile didn't disappear. No. You had hip therapy. I never had hip therapy either. He leaned back comfortably. You see, this is exactly what I've been worried about. I felt something twist inside my chest. You don't remember because your memory has become inconsistent. My memory isn't inconsistent. He reached across the table and gently covered my hand with his. Ava. His voice remained soft, patient, almost loving. I've been protecting you from worrying about these things. I pulled my hand away. I want to see the original documents. They're safely stored. I'd like to read them. I'll find them. Soon. His answers came too smoothly, too easily. For the first time I realized he had rehearsed conversations like this, maybe for years. Later that afternoon I drove to the public library instead of the grocery store. Old habits die hard. The librarian still remembered me. I borrowed one of the private research rooms and logged into the county property records website. Searching our address took less than 2 minutes. The ownership information appeared on the screen. My heart nearly stopped. The property wasn't listed under Daniel and Ava Williams. It belonged to the Williams Family Asset Trust, exactly like the documents. I wasn't imagining any of it. I printed every page available, then searched business registrations, trust filings, public legal notices. By the time I left the library, my folder contained nearly 30 pages, enough to convince me something was terribly wrong. Not enough to prove a crime. When I arrived home, Daniel was trimming the hedges in the front yard. He waved cheerfully. Find everything you needed at the grocery store. I realized he hadn't even looked at the bags I carried. Because there weren't any. I forgot. He chuckled. See? I froze. You've had a lot on your mind lately. The sentence sounded innocent, yet somehow it landed like an accusation. That evening, Emily called. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Dad mentioned you've seemed stressed. I closed my eyes. He did. He worries about you. I'm fine. I know, she hesitated. I was wondering, yes, would you mind scheduling one of those memory evaluations just to put everyone's mind at ease? Everyone's, not mine, everyone else's. I suddenly understood something that chilled me far more than the forged documents. Daniel wasn't simply hiding financial information. He had been quietly building a story, one conversation at a time, one concerned comment at a time, one gentle correction after another. Friends, neighbors, doctors, even our own daughter. Little by little, he had planted the same idea in every mind. Ava forgets things. Ava gets confused. Ava needs help. Not dramatic enough to alarm anyone. Just believable enough that if I ever accused him of wrongdoing, people would hesitate, exactly as he intended. I barely slept that night. At dawn, I climbed into the attic and opened my hidden journal. Instead of writing about the day before, I carefully spread the printed property records across the floor beside my notebook. I compared dates, conversations, appointments, comments Daniel had made over the past 3 years. Suddenly, patterns began appearing everywhere. Every major financial filing had been preceded by periods when Daniel became especially vocal about my forgetfulness. It wasn't random. It was preparation. Hours later, I placed every document back inside a large manila folder. Then I carried it downstairs. Daniel was sitting in the living room reading. Without saying a word, I laid the folder on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at the county records, then at the printed trust filings, then finally at me. Neither of us spoke. I slowly removed one final page from the folder, a copy of the forged signature. "I think," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected, "it's time you explained why my name is on documents I never signed." Daniel didn't even glance at the paper. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. Then, with the calmest smile I had ever seen on his face, he looked directly into my eyes and said, "Ava, nobody will ever believe you." For a moment, I couldn't tell which frightened me more, the words themselves or the absolute certainty with which Daniel spoke them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He simply leaned back in his armchair as though we were discussing the weather instead of the possibility that he had stolen our entire life. "Ava," he said gently, "you're making connections that don't exist." I stared at him. "My signature is forged." "You believe it is." "I know it is." He sighed, shaking his head with what looked like genuine disappointment. "This is exactly why I've been trying to protect you." The sentence hit me like a slap. "Protect me," I whispered. "You're becoming suspicious of everyone. I'm suspicious of you." His expression softened even further. "No." He folded his hands in his lap. "You're suspicious because you're frightened, and you're frightened because you don't trust your own memory anymore." I felt my pulse racing. "My memory has nothing to do with forged documents." "Doesn't it?" He nodded toward the folder. "How many years ago were those papers signed?" "I don't know." 3. He paused. "Can you honestly swear you remember every meeting we attended 3 years ago?" "I remember enough to know I wasn't there." "You think you do?" Every answer was carefully chosen. He never directly denied forging my signature. Instead, he questioned my ability to remember. I suddenly understood why this conversation felt impossible. We weren't arguing about documents. We were arguing about reality itself. "I printed the county property records," I said. "They're public." "I know." "Our home belongs to the trust." "Yes, you transferred it." "We transferred it." "I never agreed." "You did." "No." "Your signature says otherwise." I swallowed hard. "You forged it." His smile disappeared for the first time. Only slightly. "Ava." He spoke my name almost tenderly. "If you continue making accusations like that, people are going to become very concerned." "What people?" "Our daughter. Our neighbors. Our physician. My attorney." Each name landed with terrifying precision. Not threats, facts. He had already built relationships with everyone who might one day judge my credibility. I suddenly remembered all the little conversations over the past several years. Ava's been forgetting appointments. She's been misplacing things. I'm worried about her. At the time, they had sounded loving. Now I saw them for what they really were. Preparation. "You've been lying about me. I've been asking people for advice. You've been making them think I'm losing my mind. I've been telling them what I've observed." I shook my head. "No." He stood slowly and walked toward the window overlooking our front yard. His posture remained perfectly relaxed. "You know what people admire most?" I didn't answer. "Consistency." He turned toward me. "For 40 years I've been the man who volunteers at church." He held up one finger. "The man who handles charity fundraisers." Another finger. "The man who helps neighbors with financial planning." Another. "The husband who never raises his voice." Another. "The father who shows up." Then he looked directly into my eyes. "And now," he smiled faintly, "you're asking everyone to believe that I suddenly became a criminal." Silence filled the room, because I knew exactly what he meant. If our friends had to choose between believing Daniel or believing a retired woman whom they had gradually been told was becoming forgetful, who would they choose? Daniel already knew the answer. "I don't need everyone," I said quietly. "I only need the truth." He chuckled. "The truth doesn't matter nearly as much as people think." Before I could respond, my cell phone vibrated. Emily. I stared at the screen. Daniel smiled. "Go ahead," I answered. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Dad sounded worried. Of course he had already called her. "He did. He said you found some old paperwork and got upset." I closed my eyes. "He left that part out." "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke loudly enough for Emily to hear. "Ava, would you like me to make some tea?" His voice was warm, patient, exactly the voice a loving husband would use. Emily sighed with relief. "See? What Dad's taking care of you." I couldn't speak. "Mom, I'm here." If you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe let Dad handle whatever's bothering you. I looked across the room. Daniel's expression remained calm, not triumphant, simply confident. He already knew this conversation was ending exactly the way he expected. "I'll call you later," I whispered. After hanging up, I slowly placed my phone on the coffee table. "You called her before I confronted you. I didn't want her worrying. You wanted to control the story. I wanted her prepared." "For what? In case you became upset," I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because I suddenly realized how completely trapped I had become. Every path seemed to lead back to him. If I stayed silent, he won. If I spoke, people questioned whether I was confused. If I became emotional, that only reinforced his version of events. He had built a cage where every possible reaction benefited him. I gathered the papers and slipped them back into the folder. "I'm keeping these. I assumed you would. You don't care. I know you." His confidence unsettled me. "You'll spend a few days researching. You'll probably call someone. You'll convince yourself you've uncovered something terrible." He smiled sadly. "And eventually you'll realize there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. There isn't. We'll see." I carried the folder toward the hallway. Just as I reached the stairs, Daniel spoke again. One sentence. Quietly. Without anger. "If I were you," I stopped. "I wouldn't show those papers to anyone before understanding what they actually mean." I turned around. "Is that a warning?" "No," he smiled. "It's advice." I climbed the stairs without answering. Inside the bedroom, I locked the door. For the next hour, I carefully organized every photograph, every county record, and every page I'd printed from the library into chronological order. Then I placed copies inside 3 separate envelopes. One stayed hidden beneath loose floorboards in the attic. Another went inside a fireproof lockbox. The third remained inside my purse. If Daniel somehow found one, he wouldn't find them all. As I sealed the final envelope, I heard footsteps downstairs. Then the unmistakable sound of Daniel speaking on the phone. His voice was low, calm, professional. I couldn't hear every word, only fragments. "Yes, she found them. Earlier than expected." A long pause. "I understand." Then silence. My heart began pounding. Who was he talking to? A lawyer. Someone at the bank. Another accomplice. I quietly opened the bedroom door and listened. The conversation had already ended. Minutes later, Daniel called upstairs. "Dinner's almost ready." His tone sounded perfectly normal, as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't just admitted that no one would ever believe me, as though our marriage hadn't collapsed in a single afternoon. I walked downstairs determined not to let him see my fear. Halfway through setting the table, the house suddenly echoed with the sharp sound of the front doorbell. Once. Daniel looked toward the entryway but didn't move. 2 seconds later, the doorbell rang again. This time, something changed. The color drained from Daniel Williams' face so quickly that I almost didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. For the first time in 40 years, my husband looked afraid. Neither of us spoke. The second ring seemed to linger in the air long after the sound had faded. Daniel remained perfectly still, one hand resting on the back of a dining chair. His face, usually so composed, had lost every trace of color. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from him since this nightmare began. Fear. Real fear. I looked from him to the front door. "Are you going to answer it?" I asked. His eyes snapped toward me. "No." The answer came too quickly, too sharply. For a man who had spent years appearing calm under every circumstance, the single word sounded almost panicked. The doorbell rang a third time, not impatiently, just one clear, deliberate press. Whoever stood outside wasn't leaving. I took a step toward the foyer. Daniel moved in front of me. "I'll handle it." "You just said you weren't going to answer." "I changed my mind." He tried to smile, but it looked strained. "I don't think that's a good idea." "For whom?" I asked quietly. He stared at me. Neither of us blinked. Then before he could stop me, I walked around him and reached for the front door. As my hand touched the knob, I heard Daniel behind me. "Ava!" I didn't turn around. "Don't!" I opened the door. Standing on the porch were 2 strangers. The first was a man in his late 50s wearing a navy suit beneath a light raincoat. A leather briefcase rested against his leg, and an official county identification badge hung from his belt. Beside him stood an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place him. The younger man offered a polite smile. "Mrs. Ava Williams." "Yes." My name is Mark Sullivan. I'm an investigator with the Franklin County Financial Crimes Division. He held up his identification. I apologize for arriving without an appointment. My heartbeat quickened. Financial crimes? The words echoed inside my mind. Before I could answer, the older gentleman stepped forward. Mrs. Williams? His expression carried unmistakable regret. I'm Thomas Reynolds. Then I remembered. Daniel's former law partner. I had met him dozens of times at holiday parties years earlier. He had retired nearly 5 years ago. Thomas lowered his eyes briefly. I'm sorry we have to meet again under these circumstances. Behind me, Daniel finally spoke. What is this about? His voice had regained some of its calmness. Almost. Mark turned politely toward him. Mr. Williams, Daniel nodded stiffly. We'd like to speak with both you and your wife regarding several financial filings submitted over the past 3 years. Daniel folded his arms. You could have called. We attempted to. I've received no messages. Mark reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. 3 certified letters were mailed to this address. Daniel didn't answer. Mark continued. None received a response. I frowned. Certified letters, I had never seen any. Thomas glanced briefly toward me before looking away. That single glance told me everything. The letters had arrived. I simply hadn't been allowed to see them. Daniel forced a pleasant smile. There must have been some misunderstanding. Possibly, Mark replied, which is why we'd appreciate a few minutes of your time. Daniel stepped into the doorway, subtly narrowing the space between himself and the visitors. If this concerns my business affairs, my attorney can contact you. It concerns your household finances, Mark answered evenly, and specifically, we'd prefer discussing that inside. Daniel didn't move. I don't. The silence stretched. Finally I spoke. I'd like to hear what they have to say. Daniel looked at me. They don't need to involve you. Mark answered before I could. Actually, Mrs. Williams is the primary reason we're here. The words sent a chill through me. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Come in, I said. Without waiting for my husband's approval, I stepped aside. Mark and Thomas entered the house. Daniel slowly closed the front door behind them. No one spoke until we reached the living room. Mark remained standing. I want to make something clear from the beginning. He looked directly at both of us. At this stage, we're gathering information. No one is under arrest. No conclusions have been reached. Daniel smiled politely. Good. Mark opened his folder. We've identified several irregular financial transactions connected to the Williams Family Asset Trust. I felt my pulse quicken. Daniel remained expressionless. Mark continued. Those transactions involve substantial transfers of jointly owned assets. Thomas quietly added, some of the legal filings raised concerns regarding execution procedures. Daniel turned toward him. Execution procedures. Thomas nodded. Certain signatures. For the first time since they arrived, Daniel's composure cracked, only slightly. You questioned my work. I questioned the paperwork. Daniel's voice hardened. You retired years ago. I did. So why are you involved now? Thomas took a slow breath. Because I recognized something that didn't sit right with me. Daniel laughed softly. You always worried too much. Thomas didn't smile. I should have worried sooner. The room fell silent. Mark removed another document from the folder. Mrs. Williams, may I ask you a few questions? Of course. Have you ever signed documents establishing the Williams Family Asset Trust? No. Have you ever knowingly transferred your home into that trust? No. Have you granted your husband unrestricted authority over jointly owned financial accounts? No. Each answer came faster than the last. Daniel sighed dramatically. Ava? Mark raised a hand. I'll ask the questions, Mr. Williams. Daniel nodded, though I could see the irritation in his eyes. Mark looked back at me. When was the first time you became aware of these documents? I hesitated. This week. How? I found copies. Daniel interrupted. She misunderstood what she found. Mark didn't even look at him. Mrs. Williams, I found them in Daniel's office. The investigator wrote something in his notebook. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Mrs. Williams, have you ever felt pressured to believe your memory was becoming unreliable? My breath caught. No one had ever asked me that before. Not my doctor, not my daughter, not my friends, no one. I looked down at my hands, then slowly nodded. Yes. Mark remained silent, giving me space. I swallowed hard. For years. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, as though my answer confirmed something he had feared for a long time. Daniel suddenly stood. I think this interview has gone far enough. Mark looked up calmly. You're free not to answer any questions." Then he turned back to me. "But Mrs. Williams is equally free to answer every one of them." For the first time since this nightmare began, someone had reminded me that I still had a choice. I wasn't invisible, I wasn't helpless, and maybe, just maybe, someone believed I deserved to be heard. For several long seconds, no one said a word. The silence in our living room felt completely different from the silence Daniel had controlled for years. This one wasn't filled with doubt or confusion. It was filled with possibility. Mark Sullivan closed his notebook and looked at me with the same steady expression he had worn since arriving. "Mrs. Williams," he said, "would you feel more comfortable speaking privately?" Before I could answer, Daniel laughed softly. "There isn't anything my wife can't say in front of me." Mark didn't even glance in his direction. "I wasn't asking you." The room became still again. I looked at Daniel. His jaw was clenched, though he was trying hard to hide it. Then I looked back at Mark. "Yes," I said quietly, "I'd like to speak privately." Daniel took one step forward. "Ava, that's unnecessary." "I don't think it is. We've never kept secrets from each other." The irony of that sentence almost made me smile. Mark gestured toward the dining room. "We'll only need 15 minutes. Thomas remained in the living room with Daniel while Mark and I walked into the adjoining room. Mark closed the sliding pocket door most of the way, not completely, just enough to create privacy without appearing confrontational. He sat across from me at the dining table and placed a digital recorder between us. "With your permission, I'd like to record our conversation." "Yes." He pressed a button. "The time is 6:42 p.m. Present are investigator Mark Sullivan and Mrs. Ava Williams." He looked up. "Mrs. Williams, this is a voluntary interview. You may stop at any time." "I understand." He nodded. "I'd like to begin with something that may seem unrelated." I waited. "When did you first begin believing your memory might be failing?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected him to ask about bank accounts or legal papers. Instead, he wanted to know about me. I took a slow breath. "About 3 years ago." "What changed?" "My husband started noticing things I supposedly forgot." I explained everything: the misplaced keys, the missing journal, the canceled lunch with Linda, the bills I was certain I'd paid, the stories Daniel corrected in front of friends, the appointments he insisted on managing, the conversations with Emily that always left me wondering if I had imagined entire events. Mark interrupted only occasionally. "Did anyone else witness these incidents?" "Sometimes." "Did your husband ever encourage you to seek cognitive testing?" "Several times." "Did he accompany you to medical appointments?" "Almost all of them." He made another note. "Did he usually answer questions directed at you?" "Yes." I felt a lump forming in my throat. I didn't even realize how often until now. Mark leaned back slightly. "What you're describing has a name." I frowned. "A name?" "Yes." He chose his words carefully. "I'm not making a legal conclusion. But investigators and psychologists sometimes encounter situations where one person deliberately causes another to doubt their own perception of reality." I stared at him. I thought I was losing my mind. "I know." His voice remained calm. "That's often exactly what happens." Tears welled in my eyes. For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking whether I was confused. Someone was asking whether I had been manipulated. The difference was enormous. "I kept a journal," I whispered. Mark looked up immediately. "You still have it." "I have two." "Two." I suspected someone was reading the first one. So I started hiding a second journal. His eyebrows lifted. "May I see it?" "I think so." I excused myself and quietly climbed the attic stairs. The hidden notebook was exactly where I had left it, beneath the old photo albums. When I opened the cover, my hands trembled. Every page represented a day I had spent doubting myself. Now those same pages might finally help me. I carried the journal downstairs. Mark accepted it carefully, almost respectfully. He didn't flip through it immediately. Instead, he asked, "May I, please?" He began reading. Every few pages, he paused to compare dates with the notes in his own folder. Occasionally, he circled something with a pencil. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, he looked up. "This is exceptionally detailed. I wrote everything because I thought I might forget." He nodded slowly. "I believe these entries were written contemporaneously." "I wrote them every night." "That matters." "Why?" "Because records created before a dispute begins are generally more persuasive than memories reconstructed afterward." Hope flickered inside me for the first time in months. My journal could help. It might. He didn't overpromise. I appreciated that. Then he asked another unexpected question. Mrs. Williams, has your husband ever isolated you financially? I frowned. What do you mean? Did you lose access to bank accounts? Not completely. Credit cards. He encouraged me to stop carrying them because he said I kept forgetting my PIN. What about online banking? I haven't logged in by myself in years. Why not? Daniel always said he'd already handled everything. Mark made another note. What about your email? I hesitated. I mostly stopped using it. Why? He said I accidentally deleted important messages. A chill ran through me. Had I? Or had I simply believed him when he said I had? The realization left me feeling sick. Mark closed the journal gently. I'd like to ask one final question. Go ahead. If you had never found those documents, he paused, what do you think would have happened? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked through the opening toward the living room. Daniel sat on the sofa, speaking quietly with Thomas. From a distance, he looked exactly like the devoted husband everyone admired. Calm, patient, reasonable. I remembered how many times friends had told me how lucky I was, how many women wished their husbands were as attentive as Daniel. Then I imagined another 5 years, another 10. How much more isolated I would become, how much more dependent. Eventually, would anyone have questioned it if I signed papers moving into a care facility? Would anyone have wondered if I truly wanted to leave my home? I looked back at Mark. My voice cracked. I think I would have eventually believed every lie. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. A soft knock interrupted us. Thomas opened the pocket door slightly. Mark, what is it? I think you should come out here. There was something unusual in his voice. Concern. Mark stood. So should Mrs. Williams. We walked into the living room together. Daniel was no longer sitting. He stood near the fireplace, holding a thick manila envelope. His expression had changed completely. The polite smile was gone. So was the calm confidence he had worn for years. Instead, he looked like a man making a calculation. I've been thinking, he said. No one wants this to become ugly. Mark folded his arms. What are you proposing? Daniel placed the envelope on the coffee table. I think my wife deserves the truth. I stared at him in disbelief. The truth after years of lies. Slowly, he slid the envelope toward me. You've only found part of the story, Ava. I looked down at the envelope. Across the front, written in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words that made my blood run cold. Open only after my death. For several seconds, I couldn't bring myself to touch the envelope. The words stared back at me. Open only after my death. I looked up at Daniel. You expect me to believe this? His expression was unreadable. I expect you to hear me before deciding what to believe. Mark Sullivan stepped closer to the coffee table. Mr. Williams, if that envelope contains documents relevant to an active investigation, I'd advise you not to destroy or conceal anything. I'm not destroying it. Daniel folded his hands in front of him. I'm giving it to my wife. Thomas Reynolds frowned. Why now? Daniel's eyes remained fixed on me. Because she's already found enough to misunderstand everything. I almost laughed. Misunderstand? You found pieces. I found forged signatures. You found copies. I found lies. His jaw tightened. I found a plan. I corrected myself. Your plan. No one spoke. Finally, Mark broke the silence. Mrs. Williams, whether you open the envelope is entirely your decision. I reached for it. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. Not because of its weight, because of everything it represented. I slowly loosened the string closure. Inside were several sealed folders, photographs, a handwritten letter, and a flash drive. The letter sat on top. My name was written across the front. Ava. Nothing more. I unfolded the pages carefully. The handwriting belonged to Daniel. It began simply. If you're reading this before I've died, then something has gone terribly wrong. I frowned. The room disappeared around me as I continued reading. Ava. There may come a day when people question my decisions. If that day comes, they'll almost certainly question your memory too. I hope it never happens. Everything I've done has been to protect what we spent 40 years building together. You will probably hate me before you understand why. I lowered the pages. What is this? Daniel answered quietly. Keep reading. Against every instinct, I did. 3 years ago, I discovered someone had been stealing from several of my retired clients. At first, I believed it was accounting fraud. I was wrong. It involved identity theft, forged trust documents, and property transfers targeting older couples. When I reported what I'd found, I was warned to stay quiet. I stopped. Slowly, I looked toward Thomas. He looked genuinely confused. "I've never seen that letter," he said. Neither had Mark. I continued. "Eventually, I realized our family had become a target. Someone began requesting copies of our signatures. Someone attempted to access our accounts. Someone filed fraudulent paperwork using our names. The only way I could delay them was by creating a legitimate trust before they completed a fake one." Mark immediately held out his hand. "May I?" I passed him the letter. His eyes moved quickly across the remaining paragraphs. Then he looked at Daniel. "You're claiming these documents were defensive?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." I stared at him. "If that's true," my voice shook, "why didn't you tell me?" His answer came almost instantly. "Because the fewer people who knew, the safer you were." I felt anger rising again. "You let me believe I was losing my mind." "No, you let everyone else believe it." His shoulders sagged for the first time. "I never wanted that." "But you did it." "I needed people watching you?" "What?" "I needed everyone believing you required extra attention." The explanation sounded absurd, until he continued. "If criminals thought you were vulnerable—" He paused. "They'd move too quickly," Mark interrupted. "Mr. Williams, that's an extraordinary claim." "I know. Can you prove any of it?" Daniel looked towards the flash drive. "Everything is there," Thomas spoke quietly. "Daniel, if this is true, why didn't you come to me?" "I couldn't trust anyone connected to the original filings." Thomas looked stunned. "You thought I was involved?" "I didn't know who was." Mark picked up the flash drive. "I'm not opening this on a personal computer." "I wouldn't expect you to." Daniel nodded. "It contains emails, recorded phone calls, financial audits, and copies of reports I filed." "With whom?" "The FBI." Every person in the room froze. "The FBI," Mark repeated. 3 years ago." Mark's expression changed. Not belief, not disbelief. Professional caution. "Do you have a case number?" "I do." "Why wasn't any of this mentioned earlier?" Daniel looked directly at me. "Because Ava confronted me before I was ready." I couldn't stay silent any longer. "You manipulated me." His face fell. "Yes." "You lied." "Yes." "You made Emily believe I was becoming confused." "I did." "You hid mail." "Yes." "You read my journal." He hesitated. "Yes." Every admission hurt. Each one felt like another crack spreading across 40 years of marriage. "But why?" I whispered. His voice became almost unbearably quiet. "Because once I realized someone had forged documents using your signature." He swallowed. "I stopped trusting every system around us." I shook my head. "That still doesn't explain what you did to me." "No, it doesn't." For the first time all evening, Daniel's confidence disappeared completely. "I thought I could protect you by controlling everything." He looked down at the floor. "I convinced myself the fear would only be temporary." His voice broke. "Then weeks became months. Months became years. And every lie required another lie." No one interrupted him. "I kept telling myself I'd explain once the investigation ended." He looked at me with exhausted eyes. "But every time I tried—" He glanced toward the forged documents still lying on the coffee table. "There was one more problem, one more secret, one more delay, one more excuse. I wanted to believe him. Part of me desperately wanted the nightmare to transform into some tragic misunderstanding. But another part couldn't forget the countless nights I'd cried alone, wondering whether I had inherited my mother's dementia. Nothing could erase that." Mark finally spoke. "I'm going to verify every statement you've made." "You should," Daniel replied. "If even one claim proves false—" "I understand." Thomas looked at Daniel with visible disappointment. "You should have trusted someone." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know." "You should have trusted your wife." Daniel closed his eyes. "I know." The room fell silent once more. Then Mark's phone rang. He stepped toward the hallway to answer it. Only fragments of the conversation reached us. "Yes." "I'm here now. I have the flash drive." A longer pause. Then his posture stiffened. "What?" He turned slowly toward Daniel. "You've got to be kidding." The investigator lowered the phone. His face had gone pale. He looked directly at Daniel before speaking. "The FBI just confirmed there is an active investigation." Hope flickered across Daniel's face. But Mark wasn't finished. "They also confirmed something else." "What?" Mark's eyes shifted from Daniel to me. "The forged trust documents they're investigating." He took a slow breath. "Weren't filed by your husband." My heart stopped. "If not Daniel—" Mark's answer changed everything. "They were filed electronically." using credentials belonging to someone inside your own family. No one spoke. It felt as though every sound inside the house had disappeared. The clock on the mantel, the hum of the refrigerator, even the rain tapping against the windows seemed to fade into the background. My mind clung to a single sentence, using credentials belonging to someone inside your own family. I looked at Mark. I'm sorry. I don't understand. He lowered his phone onto the coffee table. I need to be careful about what I disclose while an active federal investigation is ongoing. His tone remained measured. But I can tell you this much. He glanced toward Daniel. The electronic filings originated from an account legally authorized to submit estate and trust documents. Thomas frowned. That could include attorneys, financial advisors, or anyone granted filing privileges. Mark nodded. Correct. I turned toward Daniel. You knew this. He exhaled slowly. I suspected. You suspected someone in our family? I suspected someone close enough to know our finances. I felt dizzy. Our family isn't that large. Daniel looked away instead of answering. That silence frightened me more than any accusation. Mark spoke again. The credentials themselves don't prove who physically submitted the documents. They could have been stolen. They could have been shared. They could have been used without the owner's knowledge. Thomas folded his arms. So we still don't know who actually filed them. Not yet. I sat down heavily on the sofa. For days I had convinced myself Daniel had orchestrated everything. Now the ground beneath that certainty had shifted. Had he manipulated me absolutely? Had he lied without question? But had he forged those signatures? Suddenly I wasn't sure anymore. That uncertainty made me feel almost as lost as before. Daniel quietly broke the silence. I owe Ava an explanation. Mark looked at him. You owe her several. Daniel nodded. I know. He remained standing as though he didn't believe he deserved to sit beside me. 3 years ago, he began, one of my retired clients asked me to review paperwork transferring ownership of her house. I immediately recognized the signature wasn't hers. Thomas listened intently. I reported it through the proper channels. Within 2 weeks, 2 more elderly couples came to me with similar documents. Same pattern. Forged signatures. Trust transfers. Property ownership quietly changing. Mark added, that matches what we've seen. Daniel continued. Then I received an anonymous phone call. His expression darkened. A man's voice told me to stop asking questions. I stared at him. You never told me. I was trying to keep you out of it. What exactly did he say? Mark asked. Daniel answered without hesitation. You have a beautiful family. It would be a shame if they became involved. A chill ran through me. He remembered the sentence perfectly, not like someone inventing a story, like someone who had replayed it 1,000 times. I reported the threat. No one could identify the caller. Thomas looked troubled. So you decided to investigate on your own. I decided to delay anyone trying to touch our assets. I couldn't stay silent. By convincing everyone I couldn't remember anything. Pain crossed his face. No, by putting everything under my direct supervision. You could have explained. I couldn't. Why? Because I didn't know who was listening. I stood. No. You didn't trust me. I trusted you with my life. Then why? His shoulders slumped. Because if they questioned you, he swallowed, you wouldn't have been able to tell them anything. I wanted to be angry. Instead, I felt exhausted. Every explanation seemed to create 3 new questions. Thomas walked toward the fireplace. Daniel, there's still one thing that doesn't make sense. Daniel looked up. You isolated Ava. Yes. You intercepted certified mail. Yes. You answered her medical questions. Yes. Thomas shook his head. Those decisions protected no one. Daniel closed his eyes. I know. They crossed a line. I know. They destroyed her trust. His reply came almost as a whisper. I know. For the first time since this ordeal began, Daniel wasn't defending himself. He wasn't justifying anything. He simply accepted the criticism. Mark's phone vibrated again. He checked the screen before looking at me. Mrs. Williams, I have another question. Go ahead. Has anyone besides your husband shown unusual interest in your finances over the past few years? I searched my memory. At first nothing came to mind. Then, Emily. Not Emily herself. Conversations, little comments. I frowned. My daughter asked strange questions. Daniel immediately looked up. What questions? She wanted to know whether we'd updated our will. Mark wrote something down. What else? She asked whether the house was paid off, whether we planned to downsize, whether I'd considered adding her name to emergency banking paperwork. Daniel's expression tightened. When, over the past 2 years, Thomas spoke quietly. Those aren't necessarily suspicious. I know. They're common questions. I nodded. They are. But Emily never cared about those things before, Mark continued. Anyone else? My thoughts drifted to Michael, Emily's husband, successful, friendly, always polite. He worked in commercial real estate, a profession involving contracts, titles, property records. I remembered a family barbecue nearly 18 months earlier. Michael had laughed while saying, "You two should let me handle your property someday." Everyone had laughed, including me. At the time it sounded harmless. Now, I wasn't sure. "I don't know if it matters," I said slowly. "Tell me anyway." "My son-in-law understands real estate." Daniel suddenly became very still. Mark noticed. "You've thought about him before." Daniel hesitated. "I considered everyone. Everyone. Anyone with access." I stared at him. "You suspected Michael." "I suspected possibilities. You never said anything. I had no evidence." Before anyone could continue, the front door opened unexpectedly. We all turned. Emily hurried inside, still wearing her work clothes. Her face was flushed with worry. "I came as soon as Dad called." She stopped abruptly after seeing Mark and Thomas. "What's going on?" No one answered immediately. Emily looked at me. "Mom." Then she noticed the documents spread across the coffee table. Her expression changed. Confusion, concern, then something else, something so brief I almost missed it. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. She knew those papers. The realization struck me with startling force. Emily recovered almost instantly. "What happened?" she asked, but I wasn't looking at her face anymore. I was looking at her hands. As she instinctively reached toward the documents, she stopped herself, exactly as someone would who already knew what was inside. My eyes never left Emily's hands. The movement had lasted less than a second. She had instinctively reached toward the stack of documents before stopping herself, curling her fingers into a loose fist. Most people would have reached for me, or asked if I was all right. Emily's attention had gone straight to the papers. She quickly forced a smile. "Mom, are you okay?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked the first question that came into my mind. "Have you seen these documents before?" Emily blinked. "What?" "These papers." She glanced briefly at Daniel before looking back at me. "No." The hesitation was tiny, almost impossible to notice. But after months of recording conversations in my journal, I had become unusually sensitive to pauses. Mark noticed it too. His pen stopped moving. "Mrs. Brooks," he said politely. "I'm Investigator Mark Sullivan with the Franklin County Financial Crimes Division." Emily's eyes widened. "Financial crimes?" "Yes." She looked from Mark to Thomas, then to Daniel. "Dad." Daniel's voice sounded tired. "Sit down, sweetheart." Emily slowly lowered herself into the armchair opposite me. Michael wasn't with her. For reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly felt relieved. Mark remained standing. "Mrs. Brooks, we're reviewing several financial transactions involving your parents' assets." Emily frowned. "I don't know anything about their finances." "Perhaps not." Mark nodded. "But we'd still like to ask a few questions." She swallowed. "Okay." The investigator opened his notebook. "When was the last time you discussed your parents' estate planning with either of them?" Emily thought for a moment. "I don't remember exactly." "Within the last year, probably." "What prompted the conversation?" She shrugged. "I was just making sure they had everything organized." "Whose idea was it?" "Mine." "Why?" Emily looked uncomfortable. "I work with older clients all the time." I frowned. "You don't." She turned toward me. "What?" "You're a school counselor." She stared at me, then her cheeks flushed. "I meant Michael." The room became quiet. It wasn't a major mistake. Anyone could misspeak. Yet something about the correction felt forced. Mark continued gently. "Does your husband often discuss estate planning?" "He knows a lot about property." "Has he ever offered to help your parents with legal paperwork?" Emily hesitated. "I don't think so." I spoke quietly. "He did." Everyone looked at me. "It was at the barbecue." Emily searched my face. "The barbecue? He joked that one day we'd let him manage our property." Emily gave a nervous laugh. "Mom, that was just a joke." "Maybe." I wasn't accusing her, not yet. But I could no longer ignore details simply because they were uncomfortable. Mark made another note. "Mrs. Brooks, have you ever seen the Williams Family Asset Trust?" No. Have you ever heard of it? No. Thomas, who had remained silent until then, spoke calmly. Emily. She looked at him. You've known me most of your life. Yes. I'd like you to think very carefully before answering. She nodded. If you remember anything at all, any conversation, any document, any unusual request, it could be important. Emily lowered her eyes. I really don't know anything. Her voice sounded sincere. I wanted to believe her. She was my daughter, the little girl who used to leave handwritten Mother's Day cards on my pillow, the teenager who cried when she left for college because she didn't want to leave home, the young woman who called me every Sunday without fail. Could she really be connected to any of this? My heart refused to accept it. Mark closed his notebook. Thank you. Then he turned toward Daniel. Mr. Williams, I'd like the flash drive. Daniel handed it over without argument. Mark slipped it into an evidence bag. This will be examined by our digital forensics team. Daniel nodded. I expected that. And until we verify the contents, I understand. I advise everyone here not to destroy records or discuss potential evidence with anyone outside immediate legal counsel. Thomas agreed. That's sound advice. Emily looked increasingly confused. Can somebody please explain what's happening? I looked at my daughter. How much should I tell her? Everything, nothing. Daniel answered before I could. Your mother found documents with forged signatures. Emily's eyes widened. Forged? Yes. She turned toward me. Mom, I didn't sign them. I know. The answer came so quickly that everyone noticed. Emily seemed to realize it herself. She looked around the room. I mean, she took a breath, I know you wouldn't intentionally sign something you didn't understand. Mark watched her carefully but said nothing. A few minutes later, the meeting ended. Mark collected copies of my journal entries, the county property records, and the letter Daniel had written. Thomas promised to remain available if investigators needed information regarding older trust filings. As they prepared to leave, Mark handed me a business card. Mrs. Williams. Yes. If you remember anything else, I'll call. He hesitated. And one more thing. What is it? I'd recommend keeping your journal exactly as you've been keeping it. I looked down at the worn brown notebook. It may become one of the most important records in this case. After they left, silence settled over the house once again. Emily stood near the front window watching the investigators drive away. I can't believe this. Neither could I. Daniel slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He suddenly looked much older than I remembered. Not weaker, just tired. 40 years of certainty had vanished in less than 2 hours. Emily turned toward him. Dad? He looked up. Did you really make Mom think she was losing her memory? He didn't answer immediately. Finally he whispered, Yes. Emily covered her mouth. Why, I thought I was protecting her. That isn't protection. I know. You hurt her. I know. His voice broke. I know. Watching him admit it so openly should have satisfied me. Instead, I felt empty. Some wounds couldn't be repaired simply by acknowledging them. Emily walked over and sat beside me. She reached for my hand. I'm so sorry, Mom. I looked into her eyes. I need to ask you something. Anything. If you know something, I don't. I haven't finished. She nodded. If you remember anything later, no matter how small, no matter who it involves, will you promise not to hide it from me? Emily squeezed my hand. I promise. For the first time that evening I believed her. At least I wanted to. Night fell quietly over the neighborhood. Emily eventually drove home. The house felt strangely unfamiliar after everyone had gone. Daniel slept in the guest room without either of us suggesting it. Neither one of us was ready to pretend our marriage was normal. Just before midnight, I climbed into the attic to add another entry to my hidden journal. As I reached for the notebook beneath the photo albums, I noticed something unusual. The storage box wasn't positioned exactly where I had left it, only by an inch, maybe 2. Most people would never have noticed, but I had. Slowly I opened the lid. The journal was still there. So were the envelopes. Nothing appeared missing. Yet resting neatly on top of the notebook was something that definitely hadn't been there before. A yellow sticky note, written in black ink. Just 6 words. You're finally asking the right questions. I stared at the yellow sticky note for so long that my legs began to ache. You're finally asking the right questions. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. I knew my husband's writing as well as I knew my own. Daniel formed every capital letter with careful precision. The words on the note were sharper, faster, almost impatient. Someone else had been in the attic. Someone else knew about my hidden journal. A cold wave of panic washed over me. My first instinct was to run downstairs and confront Daniel. My second instinct was to hide the note. For the first time in weeks, I trusted my second instinct more. I carefully picked up the sticky note by its corners and slipped it inside a clear plastic document sleeve I had been using for copies of the property records. If fingerprints were somehow still on it, I didn't want to destroy them. Then I checked everything else. The envelopes were still sealed. The journal appeared untouched. The floorboard beneath the old cedar chest where I'd hidden another set of documents remained exactly as I'd left it. Whoever had entered the attic had wanted me to find the note. Nothing more, nothing less. I quietly descended the stairs. The guest room door was closed. A thin line of light glowed beneath it. Daniel was still awake. I considered knocking. Instead, I returned to our bedroom, locked the door, and called the only person I trusted outside the family, Mark Sullivan. He answered on the third ring. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry for calling so late. Is everything all right?" "I found something." I explained the note. There was a brief silence. "Don't throw it away," he said immediately. "I won't." "Did you touch it?" "Only by the edges." "Good." He paused. "Did anyone besides your husband know about the attic?" "Not that I'm aware of." "What about your daughter? Emily played up there when she was little." "And your son-in-law?" "I don't think he's ever been up there." Mark thought for a moment. "I'd like to collect the note tomorrow." "I'll keep it safe." "And Mrs. Williams?" "Yes. Until we know more, I'd recommend not mentioning it to anyone. Not even Daniel." "Especially not Daniel." After we hung up, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house sounded different. Every gust of wind against the windows made me wonder whether someone was outside watching. By morning, exhaustion had settled behind my eyes. Daniel was already in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up as I entered. "You didn't sleep." "Neither did you." He gave a faint nod. I kept thinking. So did I. Neither of us mentioned the note. Instead, we sat across from each other in complete silence. 40 years of marriage had once made silence comfortable. Now it felt like a battlefield. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I've canceled my appointments today." "So have I." "I thought we should talk." "We've been talking." "No." He looked directly at me. "We've been defending ourselves." I couldn't argue with that. He poured another cup of coffee, but didn't drink it. "I know you don't believe everything I've told you." "I don't?" "I wouldn't either," he sighed. "But there's something you deserve to know." I folded my arms. "I'm listening." "When I said I suspected someone close to our family," he hesitated. "I wasn't thinking about Emily." My stomach tightened. "You were thinking about Michael." Daniel nodded. "What made you suspect him?" He asked too many questions. "About our finances. About account structures. Property titles. Insurance beneficiaries." He always phrased them as professional curiosity. I remembered those conversations. Michael had always sounded helpful, knowledgeable, interested. Nothing had ever seemed inappropriate, at least not then. "I still had no proof," Daniel continued, "so I said nothing." Before I could respond, someone knocked on the front door. Not the doorbell. An actual knock. 3 slow taps. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. This time, neither of us rushed to answer. When I opened the door, Mark stood outside carrying a slim evidence case. "Good morning?" He noticed our expressions immediately. "I take it this isn't the best time." "It's fine," I said. "I have the note." He stepped inside. After examining the sticky note without touching its surface, he sealed it inside an evidence sleeve. "I'll have this processed. Do you really think you'll find fingerprints?" "Maybe. And maybe not." He looked toward Daniel. "I also have an update." Daniel straightened. "The digital forensics team began reviewing the flash drive. And they confirmed the files weren't recently created." "What does that mean?" "It means they appear authentic." Daniel quietly closed his eyes. "They include years of correspondence, reports, financial records, and recordings." I frowned. "Recordings?" Mark nodded. "There are dozens." "Recorded by whom?" "Your husband." I looked sharply at Daniel. "You recorded people," he answered carefully. "Only after receiving legal advice." "What kind of recordings?" "Phone calls, meetings, conversations where I believed threats were being made," Mark continued. "We're still verifying everything. But so far, nothing indicates the files were fabricated." Hope and anger collided inside me. Maybe Daniel had truly uncovered a criminal scheme, but that didn't erase what he'd done to me. Mark seemed to understand exactly what I was thinking. The investigation into possible financial crimes, he paused, is separate from how you were treated. Daniel lowered his head. I know. Mark looked at him steadily. Those are two different issues. I understand. And one doesn't excuse the other. Daniel whispered, I know. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires crunching across the gravel driveway. Another car. We all turned toward the front window. A silver SUV stopped beside the curb. Michael stepped out. He looked surprised to see Mark's vehicle already parked outside. A second later, Emily climbed out from the passenger side. She hurried toward the porch while Michael remained beside the SUV, speaking briefly on his phone before slipping it into his pocket. Something about his expression immediately caught my attention. Not fear, not confusion, calculation. He looked around the neighborhood before walking toward the house as though checking whether anyone else had arrived. Mark noticed it too. Quietly, he slipped his badge back into his jacket. The front door opened before I could reach it. Emily entered first. Mom, are you okay? Then Michael followed. His usual easy smile appeared almost instantly. Good morning, everyone. His eyes swept across the room. They paused for the briefest moment. On the evidence case sitting beside Mark Sullivan. Only for a fraction of a second. But in that fraction, the color drained from Michael's face. For a split second, Michael forgot to smile. It happened so quickly that Emily didn't notice. But I did. So did Mark. Michael's eyes locked onto the sealed evidence case resting beside Investigator Sullivan's chair. His face lost its color before he caught himself forcing an easy grin back into place. Am I interrupting something? He asked. Mark answered calmly. Just a conversation. Michael nodded, slipping both hands into his pockets. Good. Emily was worried after your phone call last night. Daniel stood silently near the kitchen doorway, studying his son-in-law with an intensity I had never seen before. Emily looked from one face to another. Why is everyone acting so strange? No one answered immediately. Mark finally broke the silence. Mr. Brooks, I'm Mark Sullivan with the Franklin County Financial Crimes Division. Michael extended his hand. Michael Brooks. Mark shook it briefly. I wasn't expecting investigators to be here, Michael said with a light laugh. I imagine not. The reply was polite, but carried enough weight that Michael's smile faltered. Emily frowned. Can someone please tell us what's happening? I looked at my daughter. We're trying to understand who forged documents involving your father's and my property. Emily's eyes widened again. I still can't believe someone would do that. Michael wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders. We'll get through this. His gesture looked affectionate, protective, yet something about it suddenly felt rehearsed. Mark opened his notebook. Mr. Brooks, may I ask you a few questions? Michael shrugged. Of course. What line of work are you in? Commercial real estate. How long? Almost 12 years. Do you regularly work with property transfers? Sometimes trust documents, occasionally electronic filings. When necessary. Every answer came smoothly, confidently. Mark nodded. Have you ever assisted your in-laws with legal or financial paperwork? Michael smiled. Only general advice. What kind of advice? Oh, things like updating beneficiary information or making sure their estate planning stayed current. I interrupted quietly. I don't remember asking for that advice. Michael turned toward me. You didn't. It was just friendly conversation, Mark continued. Have you ever accessed their financial records? No. Property records. They're public. That wasn't my question. Michael hesitated. No, Daniel finally spoke. I think that's a lie. Emily looked sharply at her father. Dad? Michael laughed softly. That's a serious accusation. Daniel didn't smile. About 18 months ago, you asked me for the parcel identification number for our cabin. Michael blinked. I don't remember that. I do. You said you were curious how neighboring properties had appreciated. Michael shrugged. That sounds reasonable. It did, Daniel nodded. So I gave it to you. The room fell quiet. Mark looked toward Michael. Did you later access county records using that information? I may have. Why, I was comparing market values. Did you tell Mr. Williams that? I assumed he understood. Daniel slowly shook his head. No. I assumed you were simply interested in real estate. Michael spread his hands. I was. Mark wrote another note. Then he asked a seemingly harmless question. Mr. Brooks? Yes. Have you ever met Rebecca Turner? Michael frowned. I don't think so. What about David Cooper? No. Or Patricia Lang? Again, Michael shook his head. I noticed Daniel watching closely. Very closely. Mark closed the notebook. Interesting, Michael frowned. What is... The flash drive your father-in-law provided contains emails involving all three names. Silence. Michael answered carefully. I'm sure there are lots of people with those names. I'm sure there are. Mark's expression remained unreadable. These particular individuals were connected to multiple fraudulent property transfers. Emily looked confused. What does that have to do with Michael? No one has suggested it does. Mark's answer was technically true, but the room suddenly felt much smaller. Michael cleared his throat. I think maybe Emily and I should leave. No. The word came from Daniel. Everyone turned toward him. No. Daniel looked directly at Michael. I think you should stay. Why? Because there are questions that deserve answers. Michael's easy smile disappeared. I've answered every question. Not all of them? Daniel walked toward the bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album. He opened it carefully before removing a folded sheet of paper tucked between 2 pages. I found this 6 months ago. He handed it to Mark. What is it? I asked. Daniel answered without looking at me. A visitor log. Mark unfolded the page. It listed dates and names from our gated community's security office. I frowned. What am I looking at? Daniel pointed to one entry. 3 years ago. The week before the trust documents were filed. Mark read silently. Then his eyebrows lifted. Interesting. What? The log shows repeated visits by Mr. Brooks. Emily looked confused. Michael visited us all the time. Yes, Daniel replied, but not on these dates. Michael folded his arms. So, Daniel took a slow breath. According to the security records, you entered the neighborhood while Ava and I were both out of town. I stared at Michael. That can't be right. Emily looked equally puzzled. We were watching your house. I frowned. Were you? She nodded. You asked us. I searched my memory. I don't remember asking. Emily looked uncertain. Dad called. Every eye slowly turned toward Daniel. He nodded once. I did. You asked us to collect your mail, Emily said. Daniel remained silent. I forgot about that. Mark examined the visitor log again. So Mr. Brooks had legitimate access to the property. Michael relaxed slightly. Exactly. For the mail. Yes. Mark looked up. Did anyone authorize you to enter Mr. Williams' office? Michael's expression froze. No. Did you? No. Never? No. Daniel quietly reached into his pocket. I think you're mistaken. He placed a small brass key onto the coffee table, the very same brass key I had found weeks earlier. My heart skipped. I had 2 copies, Daniel said. I kept one. He looked directly at Michael. The other disappeared. Michael stared at the key without speaking. Daniel's voice remained calm. I've always wondered where it went. The room fell completely silent. Then Mark's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, read the message, looked back at Michael, and spoke just one sentence. Our fingerprint team has finished examining the sticky note. Michael swallowed. No one moved. Mark slowly slid his phone back into his pocket. The strongest fingerprints on that note. He looked directly into Michael's eyes. Don't belong to Daniel Williams. Don't belong to Daniel Williams. No one moved. The sentence hung in the air like a storm cloud refusing to break. Michael's eyes shifted from Mark to the evidence case, then to Emily. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely cornered. Emily frowned. What fingerprints? Mark reached into his briefcase and removed a transparent evidence sleeve containing the yellow sticky note. The note Mrs. Williams found in her attic. Emily leaned forward. What note? I quietly handed it to her. She read the 6 words aloud. You're finally asking the right questions. She looked up confused. Who wrote this? We're still determining that, Mark replied. Michael forced a laugh. So fingerprints prove I touched a sticky note. That doesn't mean anything. No, Mark agreed. By itself it doesn't. He placed another document on the coffee table. But evidence is rarely evaluated by itself. Michael's smile faded. We compare timelines, electronic records, witness statements, physical evidence, and behavior. Daniel remained silent. For the first time since this investigation had entered our home, he wasn't trying to direct the conversation. He simply watched. Mark continued. The fingerprint on the note matches a print recovered from another item. Michael folded his arms. What item? The brass office key. My heart skipped. The room became deathly quiet. Emily slowly turned toward her husband. "You had Dad's office key." Michael shook his head immediately. "No. I've never even seen that key." Daniel quietly reached into his pocket and placed the brass key on the table once again. "This one," Michael looked at it for less than a second before answering. "No. You've never seen it. No." Mark slid a photograph across the table. It showed the key inside a clear evidence bag. Along the handle, faint gray fingerprint powder outlined several prints. The latent print recovered from this key is consistent with the strongest print found on the sticky note. Michael's confidence began to crack. "Consistent isn't the same as certain." "No," Mark replied calmly, "it isn't. But we're only getting started." Emily looked back and forth between everyone. "I don't understand." She turned to Michael. "Why would your fingerprints be on Dad's office key?" Michael answered quickly. "They aren't. They could have been transferred. They could belong to anyone." Mark nodded. "They could. Which is why we obtained something else this morning." He removed another folder. "Neighborhood security footage." Daniel frowned. "I thought the cameras only kept recordings for 30 days. "They do." Mark smiled faintly. "Fortunately, your homeowners association archives entrance logs together with selected security snapshots." Thomas leaned forward. "You recovered images from 3 years ago?" "Not many, but enough." Mark laid several printed photographs across the coffee table. The quality wasn't perfect. Black and white, time-stamped, grainy, yet recognizable. One image showed Michael's SUV entering our gated community while Daniel and I had been visiting my sister in Indiana. Another showed him leaving nearly 3 hours later. Emily looked stunned. "You told me you were only here for a few minutes." Michael swallowed. You said you picked up the mail." "I did." Daniel finally spoke. "It doesn't take 3 hours to collect mail." Michael didn't answer. Emily stared at him. "What were you doing?" He looked at her helplessly. "I can explain." "Then explain." Silence. Mark didn't interrupt. He simply allowed the silence to grow. Eventually Michael sighed. "I came to look at the office." Emily blinked. "What?" "Dad asked me months earlier how I'd redesign the room if he ever retired completely." Daniel frowned. "That never happened." Michael quickly corrected himself. "I mean, we'd talked about remodeling." "No," Daniel replied evenly. "We hadn't." Another silence. I suddenly remembered something. "Michael," he looked toward me. 3 years ago, didn't you borrow our house key while we were away because you said a package had been delivered?" His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Emily turned toward him. "You never told me that." "It wasn't important. It is now." Michael rubbed his forehead. "Your mother asked me. I did." "You don't remember?" The familiar sentence struck me like ice. For years I had heard those exact words from Daniel. Now Michael was using them, almost instinctively. Mark noticed it too. His expression sharpened. "Interesting choice of words." Michael looked confused. "What? You don't remember?" He leaned forward. "How often did you say that to Mrs. Williams?" "I don't know. Once? Twice? 20 times. I never kept count." Daniel slowly closed his eyes, as though a terrible realization had finally become unavoidable. "You encouraged it," he whispered. Michael looked at him. "What?" "You encouraged Ava to doubt herself." "I was only trying to help." "No." Daniel's voice grew firmer. "You were reinforcing it." Emily stared at her husband in disbelief. "You thought Mom was becoming confused." "So did everyone." "Did you?" Michael hesitated. "I believed what Dad told us." Daniel looked up sharply. "I never told you to question her." "You didn't have to." The words escaped before Michael seemed to realize he'd spoken them aloud. Everyone froze. Mark quietly asked, "What exactly does that mean?" Michael looked around the room. I misspoke." "No." Mark's voice remained calm. "I think you were about to tell us something important." Michael stood abruptly. "I think I need a lawyer." No one tried to stop him. Mark simply nodded. "That's your right." Michael took one step toward the front door, then another. Emily remained seated. She wasn't looking at the investigator anymore. She wasn't looking at Daniel. She was staring at her husband. 20 years together, a marriage built on trust, and suddenly she didn't know the man standing in front of her. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Michael." He stopped. "Did you lie to me?" He didn't turn around. "Michael." Still nothing. Tears filled Emily's eyes. "Please." Finally he spoke, without facing her. "I never wanted you involved." The room seemed to stop breathing. Emily slowly covered her mouth. "You were involved." Her voice broke. "I was your wife." Michael lowered his head. I thought I could fix everything before anyone found out. Mark's expression changed immediately. Found out what? Michael closed his eyes. For several long seconds no one heard anything except the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded completely different. Not confident, not defensive, just defeated. I didn't create the forgery, he paused. But every person in the room leaned forward. I knew who did. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the next breath anyone took, because after weeks of searching for answers, the truth was finally beginning to surface, and it was even closer to our family than I had ever imagined. No one spoke after Michael's confession. The silence felt heavier than any argument we had endured over the past several weeks. Mark Sullivan was the first to move. He stepped calmly between Michael and the front door, not blocking his path but making it clear that this moment mattered. You said you knew who created the forgery. Michael nodded without looking up. I did. Who? His shoulders rose and fell with a long, exhausted breath. I'll tell you. Emily's voice trembled. Please don't lie anymore. Michael slowly turned to face her. The confidence that had always defined him was gone. I should have told you 3 years ago. Told me what? He looked directly at me before answering. Your parents were selected because they owned valuable property, had substantial retirement savings, and were approaching the age where financial exploitation often goes unnoticed. Mark's expression remained steady. Who selected them? Michael swallowed. A man named David Cooper. The name immediately caught Mark's attention. We've been looking for him. I know. How do you know? Michael closed his eyes. Because I introduced clients to him. Emily gasped. What? I didn't know what he was doing in the beginning. His voice cracked. He presented himself as a consultant who specialized in estate restructuring. He paid referral fees. I thought it was legitimate. Mark asked quietly. When did you realize it wasn't? The first time I saw forged signatures. Why didn't you report it? Michael laughed bitterly. Because by then I'd already accepted money. Enough that they could accuse me of participating. He rubbed both hands across his face. They told me if I went to the police they'd make sure I went to prison with them. Emily stared at him as though she had never seen him before. You kept this from me. I wanted to protect you. The words echoed through the room. Daniel slowly lowered his head. Protect you. The same excuse. Different man. Same terrible mistake. Michael continued. When Daniel started asking questions, they panicked. They believed he had enough experience to expose everything. So they decided to move faster, Mark nodded. And your in-laws became targets. Yes. I could barely force the next question from my lips. Did you forge my signature? Michael looked directly into my eyes. No. I swear I didn't. I saw the documents after they were filed. Then why were your fingerprints on the key? His shoulders slumped. I entered the office while you were away. David wanted copies of old financial statements. I thought if I gave him documents, he'd leave us alone. Daniel stared at him. You betrayed this family. I know. I thought I could control the damage. You nearly destroyed Ava. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I never meant for that to happen. I looked toward Daniel. And you, he met my gaze. You made me believe I was losing my mind. His eyes closed briefly. I did. You hid letters. Yes. You read my journal. Yes. You let our daughter pity me. His voice broke. I'm sorry. For a long moment I simply looked at him. 40 years. 40 years of birthdays, anniversaries, ordinary mornings, family vacations, and quiet evenings. I knew the man who had taught Emily to ride a bicycle. The man who stayed beside my hospital bed after surgery. The man who danced with me in the kitchen whenever our favorite song came on. That man still existed. But another man had slowly emerged. A frightened husband who believed control was the same as protection. A man who convinced himself that every lie was justified because the next one would be the last. He had not stolen our money, but he had stolen something almost as precious, my trust. Mark finally spoke. Mr. Brooks, based on what you've told us, I'd like you to come with us voluntarily. Michael nodded. I will. He turned to Emily. I'm sorry. She stepped backward. No. Her voice was calm despite the tears streaming down her face. You're sorry because you were caught. He tried to answer. She raised a hand. For 3 years my mother questioned her own mind. She looked toward me. I watched her apologize for things that weren't her fault. Then back at Michael. And I helped. Emily collapsed into tears. I helped because I believed both of you. Neither Michael nor Daniel had an answer. As Mark escorted Michael toward the door, he stopped beside me. Mrs. Williams, Yes, I know this doesn't undo what's happened. It doesn't. But without your journal. He glanced toward the worn brown notebook resting on the coffee table. None of this would have come together. After they left, the house felt strangely quiet. Emily stayed with me that night. Daniel remained in the guest room. Neither of us knew what the future looked like. Over the following months, the investigation uncovered a network that had targeted dozens of elderly homeowners across 3 states. David Cooper and several associates were eventually arrested. Michael cooperated with investigators, accepted responsibility for his own actions, and pleaded guilty to conspiracy-related charges. His cooperation helped recover assets from multiple victims, including much of what had been taken from us. The legal process took time. Healing took even longer. Daniel never asked me to forgive him. Instead, he began doing something far more difficult. He started telling the truth. To Emily, to our friends, to our doctor, to our church. He admitted that in his desperation to protect me from a threat he believed was real, he had crossed lines no loving husband should ever cross. He attended counseling. So did I. Some days we spoke for hours. Other days we barely exchanged a sentence. Trust does not return simply because someone apologizes. It returns one honest choice at a time. A year later, I stood in my garden watching the roses bloom, the same roses I had written about in the very first pages of my journal. I smiled as Emily walked through the gate carrying 2 cups of coffee. She hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom." "For what?" "For refusing to stop asking questions." I looked toward the house. Daniel was repairing the porch railing. He noticed us and gave a small wave. I waved back. Not because everything had been repaired, but because healing had finally begun. My journal now sits openly on the bookshelf in our living room. I no longer write because I'm afraid of forgetting. I write because I've learned that our own voice is worth preserving, especially when someone else tries to speak over it. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't losing your memory, it's losing confidence in your own truth. And sometimes justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. Sometimes it begins the moment you decide to trust yourself again. If there's one lesson this experience taught me, it's that trust should never require you to silence your own instincts. The people who truly love you may make mistakes, even serious ones, but real love is never strengthened by deception. When someone consistently causes you to question your own reality, it's worth slowing down and asking why. Keep records. Ask questions. Seek another perspective when something doesn't feel right. Your voice, your memories, and your experiences matter more than you may realize. Forgiveness is possible, but accountability must come first. Healing isn't pretending the past never happened. It is facing it honestly and choosing day by day to rebuild what deserves rebuilding and let go of what cannot be restored. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when trusting your instincts changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and hard-earned justice, please like this video and subscribe for more stories. Your support truly means the world to us.